"You will sleep with me tonight," said three giant Apache girls to the lone farmer. The farmer lived where the land felt endless and the sky felt close enough to touch. His small house sat alone at the edge of wide fields, bordered by rough hills and long dirt paths that only a few people ever used. Every morning before sunrise, he woke to the sound of wind brushing the dry grass and birds calling from far away. He worked with his hands, trusted the soil, and believed that quiet was safer than crowds. People in nearby towns knew him only as the man who kept to himself. He sold crops, fixed fences, and returned home before dark. That was his life, simple and steady. He had chosen this place because it was far from noise and trouble. Years earlier, he had lost his family and learned that silence could heal wounds that words could not. Since then, he spoke little and observed much. He respected the land and the people who had lived on it long before he arrived. He never crossed boundaries and never took what did not belong to him. To him, respect was not something you demanded. It was something you showed, day after day, through actions. The land around his farm was near an Apache community. He did not go there often, but when he did, he kept his head low and his manners strong. He listened more than he spoke. He knew that history carried pain and that trust took time. Most days, the two worlds stayed separate, connected only by the wind and the same rising sun. That evening began like any other. The farmer worked longer than usual, repairing a broken fence after a storm had passed through the night before. The clouds were still heavy, painted dark purple and gray, and the air smelled like wet earth. His hands were sore and his shoulders ached, but he felt satisfied. Honest work, he believed, made sleep come easier. As the sun lowered, he gathered his tools and began the walk back to his house. That was when he noticed movement near the old trail by the hills. At first, he thought it was shadows playing tricks on his tired eyes. Then he saw them clearly, three figures standing still, watching. They were tall, taller than most people he had ever seen, broad-shouldered, strong, and calm in a way that made the farmer stop walking. They were women, dressed simply, with long dark hair tied back. Their posture showed confidence, not aggression, but their presence alone made his heart beat faster. He had not expected anyone out there, especially not at that hour. The farmer did what he always did when uncertain. He stood still and waited. Running could be taken as fear. Speaking too fast could be taken as disrespect. He rested his hands at his sides and met their gaze without staring. One of the women stepped forward. Her voice was firm but not loud. The words she spoke were in English, but her accent was strong and the sentence came out sharp and sudden. "You will sleep with me tonight." The words struck the farmer like a sudden gust of cold wind. His chest tightened. His mind raced. He did not understand. Fear mixed with confusion, and for a moment he thought he had stepped into something dangerous. His thoughts went to stories he had heard, warnings people liked to repeat without knowing the truth. He forced himself to breathe slowly. He did not answer right away. He searched her face, trying to understand her meaning, her intention. The other two women stood behind her, silent and steady. None of them looked angry. None of them smiled. They simply waited. The farmer raised his hand slightly, palms open, a universal sign of calm. He spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. "I don't understand," he said. "If I have crossed a line, I'm sorry." The woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke again, more slowly this time. "Night is not safe," she said. "You are alone. Storm is coming again. You stay." "We watch." Her words eased something inside him, but confusion still lingered. He realized that what he had heard might not mean what he thought. Language could bend meaning. One word could carry many ideas. He nodded once, showing that he was listening. The sky rumbled in the distance, as if agreeing with her. Wind picked up, pulling at his shirt. The farmer looked back toward his house, then at the darkening hills. He understood danger in nature. He also understood when help was offered, even if it came in an unexpected way. He agreed to follow them, not because he felt forced, but because something in their calm made him feel safer than being alone. They led him to a sheltered area near a fire pit between rocks that blocked the wind. It was not a home, but a place meant for watchfulness. As night fell, the farmer sat near the fire while the women positioned themselves around the area. One kept watch toward the hills. Another faced the open land. The third stayed near the fire, feeding it slowly. There was no closeness that crossed boundaries. There was only shared space and quiet understanding. The farmer realized then that sleep did not mean what he had feared. It meant staying the night under protection. It meant not being alone when the land turned wild and the sky grew loud. His shoulders relaxed. Shame touched him for his earlier fear, but he reminded himself that learning came from moments like this. The wind howled as rain began to fall again. The fire held strong. The farmer stared into the flames, thinking about how quickly judgment could rise and how slowly trust was built. He understood that strength did not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it stood quietly and waited for you to catch up. That night the farmer did not sleep much. He rested, listening to the storm and the steady movement of those guarding the space. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel alone in the vastness of the land. And though he did not yet know it, this night would change the way he saw people, words, and the space between fear and respect forever. The night did not pass quietly. The storm moved slowly across the land, as if it wanted to test everyone beneath it. The wind came in strong waves, bending grass flat and pushing rain sideways. The farmer stayed near the fire, his back against a large rock. He kept his hands close to his body, not out of fear now, but to keep warm. The fire cracked softly, a steady sound that fought against the noise of the storm. The three women remained alert. They did not speak much. They moved with purpose, changing positions, checking the dark edges of the land, listening for sounds that did not belong to the storm. The farmer noticed how they worked together without words. Each one understood her role. Their strength was not loud. It was controlled and calm. At some point during the night, the rain slowed. The wind softened, but the clouds still covered the sky. The farmer closed his eyes for short moments, drifting in and out of light rest. Every time he opened them, someone was always awake, watching. That gave him a sense of safety he had not felt in years. As the night stretched on, his thoughts became louder than the storm. He replayed the moment when those words were spoken, how fast fear had taken over his mind, how quickly old stories and warnings had tried to shape his judgment. He felt uncomfortable with that realization. He had believed himself to be fair and open-minded, yet fear had still found its way in. Just before dawn, when the sky began to lighten slightly, the woman who had spoken first sat near the fire. She did not look at him right away. She warmed her hands, then spoke in a low, steady voice. "You were afraid," she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple truth. The farmer nodded. "Yes," he replied, "I was." She looked at him then, her eyes serious but not unkind. "Words can hurt when they are not understood," she said. "That happens often," he agreed. "I should have asked before assuming," he said. "I am sorry." She accepted his words with a small nod. No long discussion followed. No blame was placed. That moment of honesty seemed enough. As the first light of morning spread across the land, the women began to prepare to leave. They covered the fire and brushed away signs of their stay, leaving the land as they had found it. The farmer stood and stretched his stiff limbs. His body was tired, but his mind felt strangely awake. Before they left, one of the women turned back and spoke again. "The land is changing," she said. "Strangers pass more often now. Some bring trouble without meaning to. We watch to keep balance." The farmer understood. He had noticed changes too: more movement, more noise, less care. "I respect that," he said. "This land matters." The woman looked at him for a moment as if measuring his words. Then she nodded, and the three of them walked away, disappearing into the hills as quietly as they had appeared. The farmer returned to his house after the sun had fully risen. He made a simple meal and sat at his small table, but he did not eat much. His mind stayed with the night. He realized that something inside him had shifted, not dramatically but deeply. The land felt the same, yet he felt different standing on it. That day, as he worked, he noticed things he had overlooked before. The way paths crossed without fences, the way animals moved freely between spaces people tried to divide. He thought about how easily misunderstandings grew when people stopped listening. A few days later, he traveled into town to sell his crops. As usual, people talked. They always did. Stories moved faster than truth. Someone mentioned seeing him with the 3 women that night. The words came with raised eyebrows and quiet laughter. The farmer did not respond the way people expected. He did not defend himself loudly or deny the story with anger. He simply said, "They kept me safe during a storm." Then he went back to loading his truck. That response confused people. Some laughed it off. Others fell silent. The farmer did not care. He knew what had happened, and that was enough. Later that week, he saw the women again, this time from a distance, near the edge of the fields. They did not approach, and neither did he. But one of them lifted her hand slightly in acknowledgement. He returned the gesture. It was small, but it meant something. From that point on, a quiet understanding existed between them. They did not speak often, but there was awareness. When storms came, the farmer made sure not to travel alone. When he repaired fences, he left clear paths where needed. These were not agreements spoken aloud, but they were respected. The farmer also noticed a change in himself around others. He listened more carefully. He asked questions instead of assuming. When words sounded harsh, he paused before reacting. He realized that strength was not about control, but about restraint. One afternoon, a young traveler stopped by his farm asking for water. The farmer offered shade and a place to rest. He remembered how close fear and kindness could stand to each other, separated only by choice. He chose kindness. As weeks passed, the night of the storm became a quiet turning point in his life. It did not bring drama or celebration. It brought clarity. He learned that respect often comes wrapped in unfamiliar forms, and fear often comes from not understanding them. The land remained wide and silent, but it no longer felt empty. The farmer knew now that he was part of something larger than his own routines. He shared the land not just with soil and sky, but with people who protected it in ways he was only beginning to understand. And deep inside, he knew this was not the end of that connection. It was only the beginning of a lesson that would continue to unfold, slowly and honestly, just like the land itself. The weeks after the storm passed in a calm and steady way, but the farmer could feel that something beneath the surface had changed. His days followed the same routine: early mornings, long hours under the sun, quiet evenings, but his thoughts were no longer as narrow as before. He noticed people more. He noticed the land more. And most of all, he noticed how quickly fear could grow when understanding was missing. One afternoon, while repairing a water line near the far edge of his field, he saw movement again near the hills. This time, his body did not tense. He straightened slowly and waited. The same 3 women appeared, walking at an easy pace. They stopped at a respectful distance. No sudden words were spoken. The silence felt natural, not heavy. The woman who had spoken during the storm stepped forward slightly. "The water flows wrong here," she said, pointing toward the ground. "It will cut the land if left this way." The farmer looked where she pointed. She was right. The recent rain had shifted the soil, and the water was beginning to carve a narrow path that would soon become a problem. He nodded. "I saw it this morning," he replied. "I was about to fix it." They stood together for a moment, studying the land. Without discussion, the other 2 women moved closer and began placing stones where the soil was weakest. The farmer hesitated only briefly before joining them. They worked side by side, passing stones, adjusting the flow, shaping the ground carefully. No one gave orders. No one rushed. The work felt balanced, almost practiced, even though they had never worked together before. When they finished, the water moved smoothly again, guided instead of forced. "That will hold," one of the women said. "Yes," the farmer agreed. "Thank you." She nodded once. This land remembers who treats it well. After that day, small moments like this became more common. They did not meet often, but when they did, it was always purposeful. Sometimes it was about land. Sometimes it was about animals. Once they warned him of strangers moving through the area at night, not to alarm him, but so he could be aware. The farmer realized that trust was forming, not through words, but through shared responsibility. There was no need for long conversations. Action spoke clearly enough. Not everyone around him understood this change. Some neighbors began to notice that the farmer was no longer as distant from the nearby community as before. Quiet comments followed him in town. Questions were asked that carried judgment rather than curiosity. One man, older and loud, spoke to him directly one morning near the market. "You're getting too close," he warned. "That never ends well." The farmer looked at him calmly. "Close to what?" he asked. The man hesitated, then waved his hand. "You know what I mean." "No," the farmer said simply, "I don't." The man muttered something and walked away. The farmer felt no anger. He felt something closer to sadness. He knew how easily fear passed from person to person, changing shape but never losing strength unless someone stopped it. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the farmer sat outside his house, watching the sky turn gold and red. The land was quiet. Birds settled. Wind moved gently through the grass. He thought about the way his life had been before, safe, predictable, but narrow. He had believed that staying unseen was the same as staying safe. Now he understood that being unseen could also mean being disconnected. A few days later, trouble did come to the land. Late one night, the farmer heard unfamiliar sounds near his storage shed. He did not rush out. He listened. Footsteps, low voices, not animals. His heart beat faster, but his mind stayed clear. He remembered the words spoken during the storm. Strangers passed more often now. He lit a lantern and stepped outside, keeping distance. "This is private land," he called out calmly. The figures froze, then shifted. Two men emerged from the shadows. They looked tired, nervous. One held something that could be used as a tool or a threat. The farmer did not move closer. Before the situation could change, shapes appeared at the edge of the light. Three tall figures stepped forward, silent and steady. The men saw them and stiffened. No words were needed. The presence alone was enough. After a tense moment, the men backed away and disappeared into the dark. The women remained until the night settled again. "You did well," one of them said quietly. "You did not act from fear." The farmer exhaled slowly. "I learned that fear speaks loudly," he said, "but it is often wrong." They stayed a short while longer, making sure the area was calm, then left as they always did, without drama, without expectation. The farmer stood alone again, lantern light flickering across the ground. But the loneliness he once felt did not return. He understood now that connection did not mean dependence. It meant awareness. It meant respect. In the days that followed, word spread that the land near the farmer's fields was watched. Problems decreased. People moved more carefully. The land breathed easier. The farmer continued his work, but with a deeper sense of purpose. He was not a protector like the women, but he was no longer just a silent observer. He was part of the balance now. Sometimes, when the sun set and shadows stretched long across the fields, he thought back to the first night. The storm, the fear, the misunderstood words. He saw clearly how one moment of patience had opened a door he never knew existed. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not need to. It was enough to know that when fear appeared, he would meet it with calm, and when understanding was needed, he would choose to listen. The land had taught him that. And so had the people who walked it with quiet strength. The farmer had grown used to the quiet rhythm of his days, but the nights often carried a different kind of lesson. One evening, just as the sun sank low and the wind carried a sharp chill, he noticed movement again near the far edge of his fields. This time, he did not hesitate. His body had learned patience, his mind had learned caution. He watched from a distance, seeing the familiar shapes of the three women as they moved together, silent and strong. He approached slowly, careful not to startle them. They were preparing a small fire near a cluster of rocks, arranging wood with practiced hands. The farmer realized that this was not a casual visit, it was purposeful. He called out softly, "Good evening," and the women acknowledged him with a nod. No words of welcome, no explanations, just understanding through presence. As he sat near the fire, one of the women spoke first. Her voice was calm, measured. "The land speaks at night," she said. "It carries stories of those who pass through." The farmer listened closely, intrigued. He had never thought of the land as holding stories beyond what he saw each day. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. She gestured to the horizon where the fields met the hills. "Every step leaves a mark, every choice echoes, some are loud, some are quiet. You listen if you care." The farmer nodded slowly, realizing that she was teaching him more than words could convey. He had learned to read the sky, the soil, and the crops, but he had not yet learned to read the people who moved among the land. These women, through their presence, their actions, and their quiet authority, were showing him a way of seeing that required patience and attention. As the fire flickered, the wind picking up again, they began to share stories. The farmer spoke first, recounting small, personal tales, how he had come to this land alone, the struggles of early seasons, the loneliness that had pressed on him since the loss of his family. His voice was soft, hesitant at first, but the fire seemed to encourage openness. The women listened without interruption, their faces attentive, respectful. Then one of the women shared her story. She spoke of the Apache community, their history, and the responsibility placed on them as protectors. She told of hardships, times when outsiders had come with intentions they did not fully understand, and how trust had to be earned. Her words painted pictures of courage, of patience, and of understanding gained over years of living close to the land. The farmer felt both humbled and inspired. He saw how deeply her experiences shaped her strength, and he began to see that strength did not always shout. It often stood quietly, waiting to be recognized. Another woman added to the stories, sharing lessons about observation and judgment. She spoke about how fear could twist perception, how assumptions could cloud decisions, and how listening carefully often prevented mistakes. The farmer reflected on the first night, when a simple misunderstanding had caused his fear to spike. Now he understood that patience, even in confusion, could turn fear into clarity. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a small comfort against the cool night air. The farmer realized that the night was teaching him more than any manual or advice ever could. It was teaching him about human connection, about listening, about interpreting actions instead of just words. Each story shared brought him closer to understanding the depth of respect and trust that these women carried, not just for themselves, but for everyone and everything around them. At one point, silence fell. The wind whispered through the grass, and the distant hills cast long shadows. The farmer stared at the flames, thinking about how quickly he had judged the women before he understood their meaning. He realized that much of life involved similar moments, quick judgments, assumptions, and fear. And just as often, understanding could be reached if one remained calm and open. The women noticed his reflection and spoke gently, guiding him to see the lesson not as a critique, but as an opportunity. "Do not measure courage by fear," one said. "Do not measure trust by words alone. The heart observes more than the ears." The farmer absorbed the thought, feeling it settle deep inside him. It was a quiet revelation, subtle but powerful. They spoke late into the night, sharing experiences and insights. The farmer listened more than he spoke, letting the women's words fill gaps he had not known existed in his understanding. The night grew deeper, and the fire dwindled, yet neither urgency nor discomfort arose. The lesson itself felt like a natural rhythm, slow, deliberate, and filled with care. By the early hours, the conversation turned toward future choices. The women spoke of vigilance, responsibility, and the balance of land and people. They emphasized that true strength was not in domination, but in protection and awareness. The farmer felt a deep sense of alignment with their ideas. For the first time, he understood that the land and community around him were part of a living system, one that responded to respect, care, and attentiveness. As dawn approached, the women began to prepare to leave. Their presence had been a bridge between fear and understanding, teaching lessons without force or demand. The farmer felt gratitude deep in his chest, not for the stories alone, but for the patience, the care, and the respect that had been offered so freely. Before they walked away, one of the women turned back. "Remember," she said softly, "the land remembers more than people realize. Treat it well, treat yourself well, and the balance will follow." She nodded once and joined the others, walking away silently toward the hills as the first light of day touched the fields. The farmer watched until they disappeared from sight. He stood in the quiet morning, reflecting on the night's lessons. He realized that fear and misunderstanding had almost prevented him from learning some of the most important truths about connection, trust, and observation. Now he felt more capable of moving through life with awareness, patience, and respect for those around him. The lessons of that night did not end when the women left. They remained in his mind and heart, influencing his decisions, his work, and his interactions. When repairing fences, he took time to observe patterns in the land. When speaking with neighbors or travelers, he listened more than he spoke. When storms approached, he planned with care instead of fear. Every small choice became a reflection of what he had learned, the quiet power of patience, understanding, and mutual respect. In the days that followed, the farmer's perspective on life shifted. He no longer saw isolation as simply being alone. He understood that being part of the world required attentiveness and responsibility. His connection to the land deepened, and his connection to the people, even from a distance, grew. He respected their strength, their history, and their wisdom. The experience had also changed how he viewed himself. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to remain steady and thoughtful in its presence. Trust was not given lightly, but it could be nurtured through actions and respect. And understanding was the bridge that connected both courage and trust. By the time the sun rose fully, painting the fields in gold, the farmer returned to his home with a sense of quiet fulfillment. He knew that the night had been a turning point, not a dramatic one, but a profound shift in awareness. He had learned lessons that could not be measured in words alone, but would show in his choices, his care for the land, and his interactions with others. The farmer understood that life was a series of moments like this, unexpected, sometimes confusing, but always full of the potential for learning. And now, when the wind brushed against the grass or the clouds moved silently across the sky, he could feel the presence of lessons carried by people who chose to act with patience, wisdom, and care. That night, shared by firelight, had become more than a memory. It had become a guide, a quiet, steady path toward understanding, connection, and the recognition that strength and protection could exist in forms far beyond what the eyes could see. The farmer embraced that knowledge, knowing that it would continue to shape his days and nights in ways both subtle and profound, and that the story of trust, respect, and understanding would stay with him for the rest of his life. The morning after that long night of stories and lessons, the farmer woke with a sense of calm he had never felt before. The sun was rising slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth from a light rain the night before. Birds chirped, and the wind moved gently across the fields, rustling the grass like soft whispers. The farmer stretched, feeling strength in his muscles that had once been stiff from worry and fear. But now, he felt something more: clarity. He thought about the three women who had come into his life, not with demands or threats, but with presence, patience, and guidance. Their lessons were not in words alone. They were in actions, in careful attention, and in the way they moved through the world with confidence and respect. He realized how much he had misunderstood that first night. Fear had clouded his judgment, making a situation seem dangerous when, in reality, it had been protective and caring. The farmer decided to walk through his field slowly, observing the land with new eyes. He noticed the small ways it had been shaped by nature and by human hands. He noticed the water flowing along paths he had never truly followed, the way animals moved in patterns he had not seen before, and the subtle signs of life that marked the land as living and aware. Each detail reminded him of the lessons he had learned, the importance of patience, awareness, and respect. As he walked, he thought about trust. He realized that trust was not something given lightly, nor something forced. It was something earned through actions, through consistency, and through understanding. The women had trusted him enough to share space with him, to include him in their lessons, and to allow him to learn without fear. In return, he had learned to trust them, not blindly but thoughtfully, recognizing the wisdom behind their presence. Days turned into weeks, and life on the farm continued. The farmer worked his fields, repaired fences, tended to his animals, and cared for the land with a new sense of purpose. He began to notice changes in himself. He spoke with neighbors more openly, listening carefully and considering their words before responding. He offered help where he could, guided by a sense of shared responsibility rather than obligation. And when strangers appeared, he approached situations with calm attention, prepared to act, but never rushing to fear or judgment. One evening, as he finished his work and the sky turned pink and purple with the setting sun, he saw movement near the hills once again. It was the familiar figures of the three women. This time, there was no storm, no urgent need for protection, only presence and acknowledgement. They walked closer but kept a respectful distance. The farmer waved, and one of them returned the gesture with a small nod. That silent communication was enough. It was a reminder of the connection they had formed, and of the lessons that continued to guide him. The farmer reflected on how life had changed since that first night. The fear he had felt initially was replaced by understanding, and the misunderstanding that had caused confusion was now a source of clarity. He realized that life often presented situations that seemed frightening or confusing at first, but with patience and attention, those same situations could become opportunities for learning and growth. He remembered the stories shared by the women, the wisdom carried in their words, and the example they had set through their actions. They had shown him that true strength was not loud or aggressive. It was quiet, deliberate, and grounded in respect. They had shown him that fear could be transformed into awareness, and misunderstanding could become understanding if approached with patience. The farmer also thought about his own growth. He recognized that he had been isolated for many years, not just physically, but emotionally. He had kept himself distant from people, fearing the pain of misunderstanding or the loss of trust. But the experiences of the past weeks had taught him that connection was possible, even across differences of culture, language, and experience. It required patience, attentiveness, and respect, but it was not impossible. As the days continued, he began to notice subtle changes in his community as well. The relationships he had once thought were distant or disconnected began to feel more grounded. He listened more carefully to neighbors, offered guidance when asked, and shared small acts of kindness that were meaningful in ways larger gestures could not match. He realized that the land, the people, and even strangers all formed part of a larger system, one that responded to care, attention, and respect. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fencing along a far field, he saw a small group of children playing near the edge of the property. They paused when they saw him, watching quietly. The farmer smiled and waved, then returned to his work. He noticed how the land had changed subtly since that first night. The water flowed smoothly, the grass grew evenly, and the paths were clear and well-maintained. It was as if the lessons he had learned were being reflected back at him through the land itself. Evenings became moments of reflection. He would sit outside, watch the sunset, and think about the past weeks. He thought about the women who had appeared during the storm, their patience, and their guidance. He thought about the ways fear and misunderstanding could cloud perception, and how careful observation and calm judgment could transform a situation. He realized that the world was full of lessons, often disguised as challenges, and that the choice to learn or to fear rested within him. One night, several weeks later, the women appeared again at the edge of the fields. They did not approach closely, but their presence was enough to remind the farmer of the connection he had formed with them and with the land. He understood that their visits were not about control or oversight. They were about continuity, a reminder that the lessons of patience, awareness, and respect were ongoing, not a single event. The farmer felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for their guidance, but for the changes within himself, the ability to see clearly, to act thoughtfully, and to trust wisely. He realized that life was richer when approached with awareness, and that strength was measured not by force, but by understanding, patience, and care. As the years passed, he continued to live on his land, working diligently and observing closely. The connection he had formed with the women, and through them with the land and the wider community, remained a quiet but constant influence. He approached each new day with calm attention, ready to act when needed, but always thoughtful, always patient. The memory of that first night, the storm, the misunderstanding, the lessons shared by firelight, remained with him as a guiding story. It shaped the way he lived, the way he worked, and the way he related to others. It reminded him that fear could be transformed, that misunderstanding could become understanding, and that connection and trust were built slowly, deliberately, and with respect. Standing in his fields one morning, the sun warming his face, the farmer realized that life had changed in ways he could not have imagined. The land felt alive, not just with growth, but with lessons learned and relationships nurtured. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sense of continuity, care, and awareness that he had come to respect deeply. And in that moment, he understood that he was no longer simply a man who worked alone. He was part of a larger story, a story of trust, patience, understanding, and connection. The lessons of that stormy night and the women who guided him had transformed him, quietly and profoundly, into someone capable of seeing the world with clarity, acting with wisdom, and living with respect for the land and the people who shared it. From that day forward, the farmer continued his life with a new sense of purpose. He cared for the land with patience, observed the people around him with understanding, and carried the lessons of trust and respect in every choice he made. And though the women appeared only occasionally, their influence remained, a quiet presence guiding him toward balance, awareness, and the deep satisfaction of a life lived thoughtfully and well. The story of that first night, the storm, and the lessons learned by firelight became more than a memory. It became a guide for living, a reminder that courage and trust were possible, that fear could be managed, and that understanding required patience, observation, and respect. The farmer knew now that the land, the people, and even himself were part of a greater whole, and that when approached with care and awareness, life could unfold in ways that were meaningful, connected, and full of quiet strength. And so he worked, he observed, and he lived, forever shaped by the night when misunderstanding became understanding, fear became awareness, and a lone farmer learned the quiet power of patience, trust, and human connection.